What's going on, guys? I hope you all had a great New Year's out there. Who would be at my door at this hour? Bro, can I crash here for the night? No, you can't crash here for the night. Get lost. Well, I guess that answers the question if Bars is still mad at me. What's going on, guys? I hope you're having a great day out there. Today, guys, we're going to talk upgrades, and I'll explain to you here in a second. Now, you're always seeing lots of videos out there with, me included, everybody throwing all these upgrades on cars and doing all this different modifications and things. But I wanted to put together a little video on, some of the key upgrades and stuff. What are my favorite upgrades that I've done to some of these cars and some of the things that were, a necessity and other things that were just, little helpful factors of cars. So we're going to go over... we're trying to go over all the cars, from the 8S models, the 6S models, 4S, and on down the line here. We're going to go over some of the key features and my favorite upgrades that I put on all these cars. Now, as I said, there's lots of upgrades, and I've done lots of upgrades to pretty much all of my cars. But this is just kind of going over some of the key ones that were honestly a necessity for each car. Now, we're talking the good old Italian hoagie here. Love this car. Two things, my two best upgrades that I did to this car. Number one was different tires. The stock tires that come on this car, trash. Don't like them on this thing. That's me personally. Number two is the power system. The power system comes in this car between that and the tires. As many of you know, when I first got this car, I hated it. Other thing was the chassis. Chassis was a big issue on pretty much every one of my 6S cars I bought. Doesn't matter, Creighton, Italian, Typhon, the chassis was a big thing, and I put the M2C Racing chassis on pretty much every one of my cars at this point. Honestly, if you're doing heavy bashing, guys, the chassis are kind of a necessity off the rip because the stock chassis just do not hold up very well. You end up tacoing this thing's pretty easy, but the Italian, best things I did to this thing straight out of the box, the tires and power system, and then after that, definitely the chassis. Now for the grand old Techno ET48 2.0. Honestly, guys, one of my favorite bashers. Love this car. Biggest and best upgrade I did to this thing, besides obviously the chassis, because the stock chassis on these aren't, they're not basher chassis. However, this was the best upgrade I did to this car to make it a basher, was this aluminum front center brace. It covers from the center diff, which is kind of more shifted towards the rear to the front here, and it ties in with the M2C Racing front steering block and all that stuff. But this aluminum chassis brace I put on here was the best thing I did to this car. It made the world of difference in turning this thing into a basher. Now we're talking the good old Typhon 6S, one of my favorite just rocket cars. This thing flies like no others. Any of you guys been around the channel knows. This is honestly kind of hard. Honestly, with the bashing I did with this thing and the big launches, one of the best upgrades I did to this thing, number one, would have been the aluminum rear differential case. Now, honestly, all the 6S cars, obviously, and I've said it a million times, need the aluminum differential case at the very least in the rear. The plastic ones flex too much, and you'll be tearing apart your discs. Beyond that, I would honestly have to say the servo in this thing has made a world of difference, and I'm running the HItec, the DB961 servo in here. Love the servo in this car. After that, I killed the original chassis in this car. Of course, running the M2C Racing chassis. So, honestly, the aluminum differential case, the chassis, and the servo were the best upgrades I ever did to this car. Now, there are many things that I've loved, upgrading on all these cars. Again, we're just trying to talk some of the key things that, took the car from, a C to an A or an A+, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. The Outcast 4S. Love this thing. Thing backflips and just is a stunt monster. Now, as you guys know, most everything in here is stock except the HItec servo. I have another DB961 HItec servo in here. Helped the steering out of this thing immensely. That was a great upgrade on this thing. But the best thing that I did to this car was the M2C Racing bash bar on this thing. Kept breaking chassis on all my 4S cars I've had. I always killed the chassis so easily. M2C Racing put together the great bash bar for the 3S and 4S line, and it has made this car so much more durable. So definitely the top upgrade on this car was the M2C Racing bash bar. Number two, the servo. Now we're going to talk Crate XL. Now, obviously, I got two of these. I got the red one, the blue one. The blue one's the V2, which I'm kind of calling my cursed XL because it has It's been my problem child of my entire fleet. Now, this is the V1, the very first one I put together, and this car has been pretty awesome. So far, I mean, talking Creighton XL or just plain Creighton success, the best thing I did to this thing was turning this thing into an XL. Just had a ton of fun with this thing. And again, guys, this is the M2C Racing Creighton XL package, running the Hobby Wing combo in here. But out of all the upgrades I've done to this thing, I mean, honestly, this thing, the XL package was just awesome, stretching this car out. Number two was putting the aluminum front pillow ball steering knuckles in here. The plastic ones on this kept killing me. They just kept popping out all the time and driving me nuts. So those two things were probably my favorites on this car. I mean, pretty much every one of my 6S cars, I automatically throw a Hobby Wing combo in here. That's kind of a given. Except Type of 6S, which is one of my only 6S cars, I believe, still running the stock power system, which is absolutely amazing in that car. Still running great. But, yeah, the XL package, I mean, there's a lot of pieces of the XL package, obviously, but, you know, I love converting this thing over from the standard Creighton to the XL. It has just been awesome. But, yeah, it's probably about my best options on this one. Now, the poor Mojave. This thing's still dirty from its last bash. It still has a stock power system in here. Probably the first upgrade that I had constant issues with, and this is with most of the 6S cars, but I had a lot of them on here, was this upper pin retainer for the upper A-arm. Can't remember what this is called now. You guys know me and names sometimes, but changing this plastic one out to aluminum makes a world of difference on this car and all the 6S cars, because this top one loves to snap and your bash stay real quick. So probably have to say that was probably one of my favorite upgrades on that. And honestly, this right here, putting these pads in between the top body clips, saved breaking these things immensely. When I first got it, every time I crashed this thing or roll it hard, these things were snapping. But putting these nice pads in here made such a world of difference in keeping these things together. Now, I still have broken a couple, but any of you guys that's seen the bashes with this car will understand why. Now we're talking the jackhammer. Now, again, this is one of those hybrids where it used to be a sledge, and now it got stretched out, now converted into the M2C Racing jackhammer. Overall, now if we're not talking about, you know, changing this thing out to a whole new platform and just the upgrades that have made this car as it is now a lot better. Number one, the basher body. Big shout out to Basher Bodies for putting together an awesome body for this thing. Number two, one of my biggest issues I was having with this thing was the springs, was changing out my springs on this thing. After doing the, obviously I have the M2C Racing emulsion shock setup on here, worked great, but after everything was done, my power system was in here, the springs definitely needed some help, and I picked up these springs on eBay. If I can find a link to them, I'll put them down in the description, but changing out these springs to heavier springs helped this car out a ton with the suspension. This is also the new Hobby Wing. This is the 4990 1650 kV motor. I haven't really got to run it yet. Tested it in my backyard real quick, and the motor just felt awesome. So I can't wait to take it out for bash, but I haven't got to yet. But those are probably my two favorite things. Overall, once this thing was converted into a jackhammer, was the body and the springs. Our Infraction 3S. This is pretty simple. Nothing. This thing's awesome the way it is. Out of the box, this car is a blast. Just going out there for street bashing and thrashing this thing around. It's amazingly durable and a ton of fun. If you're looking for just a fun street basher, the Infraction 3S, and this thing is awesome. Now we're checking out the Infraction 6S. This car has been a ton of fun. And you guys know this used to be my Limitless. I did speed runs with a couple times. I hit 121 miles per hour with it. That was my best I hit, and crashed it and decided to convert it over to Infraction and just turn it into a street basher. But did a lot of other little upgrades to it. Did some different drive shafts to it. But overall, the best thing I did to this car, which was originally Limitless, was A, convert it to an Infraction, and B, these tires, guys. Any of you haven't seen these, M2C Racing carries these to the West Oz. Vipe has solid rubber tires, and they come with the rims you can get. Mine on here. I painted mine white, and these tires are just incredible. I mean, they hold up so long. You get so much long run life out of them. They have been a blast. They're great just for out there bashing. They're not a speed run tire, but they are just an awesome, fun basher tire, and they hold up really long. So probably converting this thing over to an Infraction and putting those tires on this thing has been the two best things and the most fun I've had with this car. Real quickly, I just wanted to bring up the Relarlo. This one, two best things I did to this car, the foam tires and the Radio Link radio on here made a big difference on the handling, control, and distance on this car. And I know you guys have seen the last video with this thing. This thing was a blast. This thing was a little rocket, stopped awesome. I am going to work on gearing this thing up and trying to get this thing up to 100 mile an hour, which I'm sure shouldn't be too difficult, especially if I run it on 4S, which is the plans on the next time with this car. But foam tires and a good radio system on here makes a big difference. Now we're going to talk about one of the monsters, the Outcast 8S EXB. As many of you guys know, I've done a lot of work and a lot of upgrades to this car. It's a lot of fun. I have my good days and my bad days with this car. Some days are awesome. Some days are terrible. It all seems to depend. But my two upgrades to this thing that I did that made the best changes to this thing and not having as many problems. Number one would be these the center brace ends here. Now, I left a couple of them stock plastic on this one. My Creighton 8S, however, I changed them all out, and I'm going to do the same thing on here. Replacing out these plastic ends with the M2C Racing aluminum ones, stop breaking them, stop having a lot less issues with so much chassis flex and those things snapping. Now, it's good to always have some sort of weak point, and that was why I left the plastic ones in here originally, but I haven't had any issues with the Creighton 8S with making those all aluminum, so I'm probably going to do the same thing to this one. Besides that, would definitely be the chassis. The chassis on this thing, I bent very early on, put the M2C Racing chassis on this thing, and never had another issue with it after that. So definitely the chassis and those center brace ends were two of my best upgrades to this car. Now, the Creighton 8S, I've been trying to give mainly the first two top upgrades. Now, this one honestly has a couple more than just two that I'm going to say was a great upgrade and overall made the car a lot better. I'm going to go number one, the M2C Racing heavy-duty shock rods. I think these are the 5 mil thickness ones because the stock ones kept bending all the time on heavy landings. So that was one of the best ones I did. And like I said, did the aluminum center brace ends on the front and rear in this one. And I haven't had any issues. I was worrying if I might start breaking a shock tower or something like that with making all them aluminum. But so far, so good. And again, the chassis was a huge upgrade on this car. Was pretty much a necessity. The M2C Racing chassis on here. I've never had another issue with the chassis ever since then. And after that, I would definitely say the body. And again, a big thank you to Speed Psycho for the body. The stock body kept breaking the stock bodies, cracking them constantly. So if I had to narrow it down to just two upgrades, or two best upgrades I've done to this thing, would definitely be the shock rods, and probably number two, I don't know, guys, it's hard between the body and the chassis. I'm going to say the chassis, but the body was, it's one of those things where it gets annoying, especially if you're out there bashing in the colder weather. The body was constantly shattering and falling apart, but, the cars, like I said, there's tons of upgrades to all of my cars, so it gets a little harder on certain models to narrow it down to just two, but I would have to say that. Now, we're not talking cars, of course, but my favorite upgrade I did to my plane this year was put bigger tires on it. Made it much easier landing in the grass. I know nobody really cares about my plane, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Two other things besides each individual car upgrade. Obviously, favorite tires for, a lot of the cars, depending on the car. 4S D-boots backflips, love them on many of my cars, as you guys can tell. The 6S backflips, I really loved on, the Creighton 6S and the XLs and all that. But I tried a set of these copperheads here. So far, I've liked the tires. They don't seem to hook up as well in certain conditions, with especially on pavement or harder surfaces. But I haven't got to get on the motocross track with them yet, really. But those are probably my two favorite tires. Are going to be the D-boots, the 4S backflips. And I'm going back and forth right now because I was having a lot of issues with the 6S backflips with glue just being trash from the factory. So as you guys know, I got those 4S backflips on many cars. One other thing we're going to touch base on here real quick is radios. As you guys know, I've ran the Spectrum, the DX5C for a number of years now. And that remote has just been, honestly, it's been great. It's held up great. That thing has been with me through a few rainstorms that I've been caught at the motocross track, and it was soaked. And literally water dripping out of this thing. And it continued to dry out and still live to see another day. Now, we got, obviously, the new RC8X transmitter. Awesome controller, tons of features. Do I love it? Do I really like the controller? Absolutely. But I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys. I hope, if anybody gets mad at me, be mad at me. Do I think that radio is necessary for your average basher? I don't. For speed run cars, race cars, and stuff like that, yeah. There's a ton of features on that remote. It can do lots of cool stuff. Absolutely. It definitely is a great remote. But for your average basher, and, just wanting to hook up all your Spectrum receivers that comes with an ARMA to just one remote, the DX5, and now they just came out with the DX6, the 6-channel, which should be a really cool remote. But, one thing I'd say, I got to tell everybody, guys, and I'm just being honest here, that, just because there's new shiny stuff out there, or certain channels are running certain things, doesn't mean you got to get it. So much stuff is not necessary. There's key upgrades and things that are necessary, and you'll learn that way as you continue to bash things you're breaking all the time, things you're bending all the time, and stuff that has to be done to the cars. But don't just go out there and spend your money or waste your money on stuff that's, honestly not necessary. Find out what works for you, find out what you need, and go with that. I know there's lots of guys on our influencers. You see them running this cool stuff or certain things, and yeah, it looks cool, but is it necessary? 99% of the times, it's not. So just keep an eye on what you're doing, what your problems are, and work on those. And, keep an eye on that stuff. Don't worry about what might be the coolest, latest thing out. But anyway, guys, I think we're going to finish up the video. I just kind of wanted to go over, I was kind of down there thinking about it, the key things that I've done to a lot of these cars that really changed them and made them so much better. And I was just trying to keep it to mainly 2 upgrades per car. I know a couple things we may have won 2 or 3, but, I tried. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully we get some little better weather here soon and we can get out for another bash. But that's going to do it for today. So until next time, y'all, be safe, be careful out there. Peace out, everybody.